Great. Now you are forced to have to listen to me. Thank you, Paula, very much. I appreciate the send up, and it was a great opportunity for me to stop over at the center earlier today and just see the work that she and her team are doing, and learning a bit more about the area and the community and things of that nature. I always like to do that before I get an opportunity to speak, and because I think it's really important to understand that. Now, I've been to North Carolina quite a bit, but I spent most of the time when I came to North Carolina in the Chapel Hill area because my son went to UNC, played football for them. So I know some of y'all will be like, yay, some will be like, boo, and some of you will be like double boo, depending on where you may be. So it was my first time really getting to this area. I didn't get an opportunity a lot to come to Charlotte, but thank you very much for an opportunity to speak to you. Now, I've been with CareNet for 7 years, and prior to that, I was with an organization called National Fatherhood Initiative, and that was an organization that was focused on helping to connect fathers to their kids heart to heart. And when I made the change to CareNet, there were some folks who said, gosh, I mean, that seems like a really strange change. Here you are, National Fatherhood Initiative working with men, and now you go to CareNet, and you come to our conference, as Paula can attest, it's difficult to find a men's room at our conference. Suppose they reflag them all, and the men have to search wide and far for a men's room, and those of us over 50, that's a challenge. So all the men over 50 say amen. Amen, right? But it really was not that strange of a transition for me because when I was a 20-year-old college student, I got my girlfriend pregnant. We got pregnant. We were both undergraduates at Princeton, and we got pregnant. I'm not sure how that happened. I'm still trying to figure that out, but it's probably another talk. But I remember when she went to Student Health Services and met with the nurse there, and the nurse takes the test, the pregnancy test, brings it back, and comes back and says, you're pregnant, and without missing a beat says, now, of course, you're going to have an abortion. And my girlfriend said, no, I don't want to have an abortion. I want to get married. I want to have my baby. And she says, well, that doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense. What year are you? She says, well, I'm a sophomore. She says, well, it doesn't make a lot of sense for you to try to think about finishing Princeton with a baby. What do you want to do when you graduate? She asked her, and she says, well, I want to become a doctor. And so she says, my gosh, how are you going to graduate from Princeton and become a doctor with a baby? And, it's interesting because the nurse was an older woman, probably a mother herself. She could have said, how can we make your choice work? Who's the father? Where's the father? Maybe we can have him come to the next visit to support your choice in his child. But she didn't say any of that. So there we were, pretty much penniless college students. And I remember her coming back to the dorm and us sitting on the edge of the bed, which is obviously where we should have spent all our time. I just keep it real. But and telling me this story, what the nurse had said, and in my 20-year-old way, I said, no, we're gonna stick with the plan. We're gonna get married. I'm gonna be a husband to you and a father to our child growing inside of you, and that's exactly what we did. So we got married. There's our wedding picture there. My wife Yvette. I don't know where I'm looking. It's kind of an interesting thing. I'm not sure where I'm looking. Some of you may have 20-year-olds, and will just look out, and you're wondering what's going on up there. I don't know what's going on up there with me. But there we are. And, it's interesting. The nurse was right about one thing but wrong about another. And it wasn't that Yvette was going to graduate with one baby. She actually graduated with two. So those are our two boys, Jamin and Justin. Jamin, our oldest one. He still dresses like that. He's a hipster, very efficient. And Yvette, ended up carrying Justin, our youngest one, in her graduation. That picture is an old picture that was taken by an AP photographer. This young lady graduating from Princeton with a baby strapped onto her. We weren't trying to make news. Justin needed to eat, and she had what could feed him, so we strapped him on. So when we roll in the Warren family, we're very efficient. We think about these things. And here she is graduating from medical school. She became a doctor, and been practicing for, gosh, almost 30 years now. Here she is delivering her first baby, not her own baby, somebody else's. And here are our two boys, both married, the circle of life, the circle of life, the circle of life. And then I have a grandson out of the mix, too, as well, named Gabriel, so it's been amazing. And, it's interesting to me, because whenever I look at that picture, I'm reminded of the saying that anyone can count the number of apple seeds in an apple, but only God knows the number of apples in a single seed. You see, we don't understand potential. We don't know potential. We can't see that. And often, when we see things, we see dimly. And, it's interesting because, as I came to Carrollton and started to think about this, I had a reporter that asked me early on, well, what were you thinking when you said to, your girlfriend, now your wife of 37 years, that I'll be a husband to you and a father to our child growing inside of you? And the word that came to my mind was certainty, certainty. That's Jamin's ultrasound picture. You see, because I was certain about what was happening inside her, that it was a child, that it was my child, that it was a life. Because I was certain about that, I was certain about everything else. I was certain about what I needed to do. And that's an interesting word. Some years ago, Planned Parenthood had an ad, kind of talked about the life issue and said, we can't talk in terms of pro-life or pro-choice. It's just as complicated. It's just complicated. It's complicated. And, I started to think about the typical pregnancy test. Some of you have taken the pregnancy test. I did. I took one it's part of the interview process. So you can fit in with the peeps. It was negative. So. And I thought about the typical pregnancy test, right? And my understanding is there's a cup, right? And the cup has some stuff in it. And then there's a stick, right? So you got the cup with the stuff and the stick, and what you're supposed to do is what? You're supposed to stick the stick in the cup with the stuff, and you pull it out, and you read it, and it says it's complicated. Doesn't say that, does it? I mean, it either says that you're pregnant or that you're not. It's not really all that complicated, and especially when you think about it from the perspective of the child. It's really not complicated at all. The child either gets life or the child does not. It's really not all that complicated. It's pretty much a yes or no kind of scenario. Well, anyway, a few years before I'd come to CareNet, and God was kind of preparing me to move from National Fatherhood Initiative to CareNet, He gave me an insight that was really important in terms of shaping how I think about the issue, and part of what Paula was talking about, is that I was thinking about the most celebrated or the best known unplanned pregnancy. And you know which one was? Well, it was the birth of Christ. You see, from a human perspective, that pregnancy was unplanned. So Mary had hopes and dreams and aspirations for her life and her life with Joseph that did not include a child at this time and in this way. And what Mary did was, instead of focusing on the uncertainty of what she didn't know, like how was Joseph going to respond? How was I going to take care of this baby? What's my community going to say? All these questions swirling around in her head. Instead of focusing on the uncertainty of what she didn't know, she focused on the certainty of what she did know. And what she did know was that there was a life growing inside of her, and that it wasn't a life worth sacrificing. It was a life worth sacrificing for. And what did she do? She said, "Let it be unto me as you have said," and chose life. And when you think about it, like what Paul and her team do at the pregnancy centers, essentially what they're trying to encourage women to do is to ascribe to themselves the virtue and the character of Mary. Despite all the uncertainty of what they don't know, to focus on the certainty of what they do know. There's a life growing inside of them, and it's not a life worth sacrificing, but it's a life worth sacrificing for. And for them to say, "Let it be unto me as you have said." But, when you think about it, what did God do to make sure that Mary's unplanned pregnancy was not a crisis pregnancy? Well, he sent an angel to Joseph. And you see, Joseph was a man, and when you're a man, you have a plan. And if you don't have a plan, you ain't no kind of man. That's the way we roll. And so Joseph had a plan, and what was Joseph's plan? He was going to put Mary away quietly. I mean, he thought that, she could have been stoned, all these other things, but he thought, the good thing to do, the better thing to do, was really to put her away quietly. And the angel comes to Joseph and says, "Listen, I know you're a man with a plan, but I got a new plan for you, man, and it is this. I need you to be a husband to her and a father to the child growing inside of her. Husband to her and father to the child growing inside of her. And Joseph too says, let it be unto me as you have said. And then when Mary was at risk, do you remember that when Herod wanted to kill Jesus and Mary and Jesus, and they're all at risk? I mean, who did the angel go to? Went to Joseph. And said, listen, I need you to do two things. I need you to provide and to protect. One man, two missions. Husband to her, father to the child growing inside of her. One man, two missions, to provide and to protect. You see, there's always been a role for men when it comes to unplanned pregnancy. And that has a lot to do with the fact that, see, God doesn't just want children to have life, but he wants more than that. See, that's why the Holy Family was Holy Family. A father and mother united in marriage, loving each other, loving their child, and loving God. Now, when you think about it, I mean, scriptures could have been written a lot of different ways. It could have been written in such a way that Jesus came into the world, he just showed up as an adult. It could have been written in such a way that Mary just was a single mother who had a child. But the way Jesus came into the world was a way that accomplished God's purpose without violating his principle, his high idea. See, God has a design for how children come into the world. There's a high idea. And Jesus came into the world in a way that was consistent with God's high idea. See, Jesus came into this covenant relationship that Mary and Joseph had. They were in a marriage. There was a covenant relationship that had not been consummated. And Jesus came into the world in that covenant relationship. And I think that's really significant. See, because in my humanity, the first thing I would have told Joseph as I was the angel was, well, she's carrying the Christ child. Protect that baby. Isn't that interesting? But the first thing that the angel did, the very first thing that the angel did, was to affirm the sanctity of marriage and family before he affirmed the sanctity of life. And I want you to catch that, because that's significant. And see, it really leads to a perspective of a notion of abundant life. See, a big part of what CareNet does and the work that we do is really based on John 10:10. And that's what Paul was talking about, this notion about, you see, Christ came, and he said, I came that you might have life and have that life abundantly. So I'm a business person by training. You always have to have your why statement if you're in business. Like, why do you exist? Well, this was Jesus' why statement. Why did he exist? Why did he come? Well, he came that we might have life and have that life abundantly. Now, it's interesting because when you look at that verse, Jesus is really talking about two types of life. He's not just talking about bios, which is physical life. He's also talking, these are Greek words, zoe, right, which is a unique type of spiritual life that only comes from a relationship with God. So in other words, if we're going to be anchoring what we do in this work as followers of Christ with Christ's why statement, then that means that we can't just be pro-life. We have to be pro-what? Abundant life. You see, you can be an atheist and be pro-life. See, because an atheist just solves for bios, physical life. But see, if you're a Christian, it's about heartbeats that are heaven-bound. It's about heartbeats that are heaven-bound. So it's not enough just for a child to come into the world. And that's why, so when people ask me, am I pro-life? I say, no. I'm pro-abundant life. I'm pro-abundant life. Because I think when you're thinking about this issue, we should think about this issue in the context of our faith. And here's the thing. See, you can't be pro-abundant life without engaging fathers and without talking about marriage. And it's interesting because it's not just about whether that mother marries that guy, because or that guy marries that woman. I mean, I know that there are cases when that's not possible. She might not be marriageable. He might not be marriageable. But someone's coming to this pregnancy center and meeting with Paul and her team because they've de-linked fatherhood, motherhood, and sex and marriage and God's design for that. In other words, if you're a married person and you're not having sex with someone who's not your spouse, well, why is that? Because when you look at every sexual opportunity, you say, well, God has a design. Fatherhood, motherhood, sex, and marriage, those things are linked. And so it doesn't get through the filter. So if a client comes in and we love her up, and she's de-linked fatherhood, motherhood, sex, and marriage, and God's design for those things, and she leaves with those things de-linked, what do you think happens too often? She'll be back with a new baby and a new guy. Now, if you're pro-life, you're good. Check, check, check. So she has 3 kids or 3 different guys, we're good. Really? Really? See, Christ's call, he said what? Come as you are. But he said, don't stay as you came. Come as you are, but don't stay as you came. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. See, our sign cannot say, thank you, come again. I mean, that's Walmart, Chick-fil-A, Wendy's. Thank you, come again. Our sign said, no, thank you, don't come again. Not to be served, but to be service to others. See, because if you have a perspective that says, thank you, come again, then you're actually a retail consumer business. You're actually like Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood and the abortion providers model, right, is come as you are and stay as you were. They don't want you transformed. Any more than Chick-fil-A wants you to come in loving chicken and leave hating chicken. Come loving chicken, leave loving chicken. Come as you are, stay as you came. It's a transaction in retail business. But we're called to what? A relationship-based, covenant-building ministry. So there has to be a transformation. And so that means that you've got to change the way people are thinking about family. And you've got to be thinking about how helping a person who's come from more baby showers than wedding showers understand God's design for marriage. And how that's a transforming covenant relationship. And so that even if she doesn't marry that guy, she's transformed by how she thinks about sex, so that the next time she has an opportunity to have sex, she views it through the lens of fatherhood, motherhood, sex, and marriage and God's design, and that she communicates those values to her children. And so that the guy can, you see what I'm saying? Otherwise, we have what I call the 18-18 rule. We'll see her in 18 months with a different guy in a new crisis, and we'll see her daughter in 18 years, and someone her son got pregnant in 18 years. That's great if you're retail. It's not great if you're ministry. So this is significant. So the difference between pro-life and pro-abundant life is really that notion. You're solving for heartbeats that are heaven-bound. Now, I would suspect probably for some of y'all, I mean y'all and all y'all, that's plural, my understanding is, y'all and all y'all. I conjugate that properly? I got the thumbs up from the pastor, so I know I'm good. This may be the first time that you've heard this perspective. And part of it has a lot to do with the fact that how we frame the issue and how the issue came into the public square. So in 1973, the issue came into the public square by the pro-choice side, and they said, look, this issue is about a woman and a question mark, and they started defining the question mark. It's about the product of conception, it's about choice, it's complicated. And we responded from a pro-life perspective and said, no, it's about the woman and the baby. Excuse me, it's about the baby. It's about the baby. We have to save the baby. We must save the baby. And then the pro-choice side started to attack us and said, you don't care about women. You just care about saving babies. Anybody ever heard that before? You don't care about women. You just care about saving babies. And we responded and said, no. We care about women too. Love them both. Love them both. Love them both. And this, interestingly, this is essentially where the movement sits today in the minds of many people. You have two sides. One side that says it's about a woman and a question mark, and the other side that says it's about a woman plus a baby. And I guess what I want to leave you with is that framework is not the framework that we should have. And I had a reporter once ask me, is CareNet more for the woman or more for the baby? And I said, that's a great question. It's like asking me, am I more for breathing in or for breathing out? I mean, they're both essential to life. See, that whole framework that they have is not the right framework. So I just reject it. See, because as you see from the story of Mary and Joseph, this issue isn't just about one sanctity, but it's about two. It's not just about the sanctity of life, but it's about the sanctity of marriage and family as God designed. And the first thing that the angel did was what? Affirmed what? The sanctity of marriage and family. The first thing that the angel said was, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife. Not your baby mama, your boo, your wifey, your shorty. Young people know what I'm talking about. I'm getting some nods in the front row. They know. They're like, yeah, that's right. But your wife. And that's significant because God, in his wisdom, he created the basket for the baby before he delivered the baby. So we really shouldn't be talking about the sanctity of life issue without talking about the sanctity of marriage and family issue. And the problem is that we in the pro-life movement, in large measure, we've delinked those things. We only talk about one, not the other. Now, the interesting thing is that is a challenge, and it's a problem. Why? Because essentially what the law did, what Roe v. Wade did, it did something that was very significant that a lot of folks didn't talk about, was that it basically delinked fatherhood and motherhood in the womb. See, legally now, women become mothers at conception, and men become fathers at birth, legally. That's what the law says. So if you wonder why we're struggling to get men involved when they're not married to the mother of the child from conception to birth, well, they've been told for 40 plus years, you ain't actually a father until birth. So rights and responsibilities are linked. So if I have no rights to the child in the womb, why should I have responsibilities for the child in the womb? Men are practical. But what do we know? That if he's not connected from the point of conception, right, it's very difficult to re-engage him at birth. I always tell folks, every child has an involved father at conception. Let that settle in a little bit. You might get that in the car when you're heading home. The question is, does that child have an involved father at graduation? So because we framed the issue the way the other side did, we actually haven't been talking about one of the most significant things about Roe v. Wade was that it delinked fatherhood and motherhood in the womb. And because it delinked fatherhood and motherhood in the womb, it also delinked husbandhood and wifehood in the womb. Because in God's economy, you're not supposed to be a father unless you're what? A husband, and you're not supposed to be a mother unless you're what? A wife. And the other issue is that we cannot let ourselves, and I hear this often, fall into this trap that this is just a woman's issue. This is a woman's issue. The other side yells it loudly with the mantra, it's her body, it's her choice, and sometimes even on our side we kind of hear that it's just about the woman, it's just about the woman, but the reality is that if we do that, then we actually agree with the other side, and we're just arguing about whether the woman is a baby, the woman and the baby, or the woman and the question mark. It's really a question of, well, we agree it's about the woman, we're just arguing whether the baby is a question mark or not. And that framework excludes who? Husbands and fathers. There's no on-ramp for husbands and fathers to even be engaged. Why? Because the issue was framed from this perspective by the other side that doesn't need husbands or fathers. If we need the guy, we need him to just pay his half for the abortion, which is interesting. It's your body and your choice, but I pay half. But on our side, what? We need the guy. At a minimum, we want the guy to pay for the baby, certainly, to support the child, but from a societal and certainly from a Christian perspective, we know that children need way more than that. So by framing our response to the issue by a paradigm that was set up by the other side, we actually hurt ourselves. And in large measure, that's what's been happening in the pro-life movement. And, I love Frederica Matthews Green. Some of you may have heard of her. She's a writer. She wrote this book called Real Choices, Listening to Women Looking for Alternatives to Abortion. She said, providing a substitute for a father in pregnancy and child rearing is like providing a substitute hand. A dexterous, lightweight prosthesis with some grasping ability is better than nothing, better than a hook, better than last year's model of prosthesis. But the most advanced artificial hand that researchers can dream of will always be blunt and clumsy compared to the flexibility, warmth, and sensitivity of the original. It's better not to lose the hand. It's better not to lose the man. And I feel very strongly about this because when that happens, and it forces Paula and her team to try to be artificial husbands and fathers to women and children that need real ones. And of course they can. And the other issue, and I'll just go through this quickly, is that we talk to women who had abortions and we ask them who was the most influential in their decision to abort. And guess who was number one? The guy who got her pregnant. More than the abortion provider, her mama, her best friend, her girlfriend, the guy who got her pregnant. It's number one. Then we also ask, who was the most influential in your decision to abort? And guess who was number one again? The father of the child. So he's the most influential. He's the one she talks to more often, and he's the most influential. And yet, in large measure, our response, we build an entire response that doesn't include the most influential person. Does that make sense? I mean, I'm a business person by training. Like, if you say to me, listen, Roland, if you want to do business with me, you see Joe over there in the corner? Yeah, Joe, yeah. He's not the decision maker, but he's the most influential person in the decision I will make. What do you think I'm going to try to do? Get with Joe. Is that what we're doing? Is that how we built our response? You see, mothers and children need a certain type of support. This chart basically kind of illustrates that. That's why I kind of use these things to try to help people understand that. See, mothers and children need a certain kind of support, physical, emotional, and spiritual support from conception to birth and onwards. And, God is wise. He has a design to make sure that mothers and children get the support that they need. It's called husbands and fathers. See that teal in the corner? That's the amazing work that's happening at this pregnancy center from conception to birth and maybe a little bit further. This network of pregnancy centers across the country, last 9 years or so, nearly 800,000 little ones have been saved by people who were doing the work that Paula and her team were doing. 77,000 alone just in the last year. It's amazing work. That's why we need your support. But there's a problem. See, that's called missing support. See, that's where a woman's hopes and dreams and aspirations for her life are. To the degree that a woman can't figure out how she's going to fill the missing support, she's much more likely to have the abortion. So while we have her in the pregnancy center, loving her up and telling her about all the support she has from conception to birth, and maybe a little bit further, the other side is reminding her of all the support she doesn't have. See, that's what the nurse was talking to my wife about. That's where her hopes and dreams to becoming a doctor were there. You can read a lot of books on abortion and the whole issue, but frankly, one chart. That's it. This is about 9 months and 1 second. And she's making the decision about whether to bring the child into the world based on the support that's coming after. Do you see why it's so critical to get the guy involved early on? Because she's making the decision between conception to birth. Now, 86% of the women that have abortions are unmarried. So what does that tell you? That you can't delink the sanctity of marriage and family and the sanctity of life. Because the biggest predictor of whether a woman will have an abortion or not is that she's unmarried. How can you say that it's not linked to? Of course it is. So therefore, if you actually want to reduce abortion, what do you have to do? Increase the marriage rate. Or at least increase the number of folks who are linking fatherhood, motherhood, sex, and marriage in God's design, and have that filter when they're thinking about their sexual decisions. And that's why God sends them to us. That's why God sends them to Paul and her team who understand the importance of marriage. So they can articulate that value, to give her a vision, to give him a vision that may be very different from the one that they've lived in. So they can communicate that value, that set of values. See, in my particular situation, that was so critically important that I saw that value set, even though I was a black boy growing up in a father-absent home. Even though my mother got pregnant the first time when she was 16, 17 years old. Even though by the time she was 23, she had 4 kids under the age of 8. But what she never did was she never talked down marriage. So when I got my girlfriend pregnant, I understood that fatherhood and marriage were linked. So the concept in my mind of being a father without being a husband that wasn't even a concept that I even could get my head around. How does that happen? It's because somebody communicates those values. Somebody models that. Someone articulates that. That's why God is sending them to us, the people of the book. That's why in the first chapter of the first book of the New Testament, in the story of Christ, we have our ministry model. After being silent for 400 years, he comes back in the first chapter of the first book of the New Testament. He gives us the ministry model. And the question is, are we following it? And this gets to also then how the church needs to respond to this issue and how the church needs to change in terms of how it responds to this issue. And that would be y'all and all y'all. See, because when she doesn't have someone who says, I'll be a husband to you and a father to the child growing inside of you, then who's supposed to step into that gap? And the other issue that we have is that 54% of the women that have abortions profess to be either Catholic or Protestant. And in that same study where we found that the father was the most influential, we found that 4 out of 10 women who had abortions were attending church at least monthly at the time of their first abortion. So what does that tell you? Right? If you look at any of the data, Barna or anybody who kind of looks at it and says, well, who are the real Christians? Not the CEOs, Christmas and Easter only people. But the real Christians are the folks that go to church at least monthly. So in the church on Sunday, in the abortion clinic on Monday, we have a problem in our church with abortion. See, this is the log in our eye versus the speck in the culture's eye. And part of what God's put on my heart is, how about overturning Roe v. Wade in our own churches and in our own pews first? What a witness we would have. See, we're marching here, marching there, wanting to defund Planned Parenthood. We should. Don't get me wrong. But if you use that 40% number and the abortion numbers, I'll just use 1 million for round numbers. It's gone down over the last few years, thankfully, but I'll just use that just for reference purposes. 1 million abortions, 40%, that's 400,000. The average abortion is roughly $500. 400,000 times 500 is 200 million. That Christians are funding the abortion industry year after year after year. Do you see? Now, lest you think I'm being too critical of women who have abortions and the Christian men often who support this, you've got to ask yourself a question. If someone in your church on a Sunday morning, a young lady takes a pregnancy test and it's positive and that's not good news, who exactly is she supposed to talk to in your church? See, it's basically 9 days from the time a woman confirms her pregnancy until she has her abortion sometimes, but certainly starts to schedule it. There's only one Sunday in there. She has to know when she takes that pregnancy test and it's positive and that's not good news, that her church is not going to try to treat her like the Pharisees tried to treat the woman caught in adultery. See, because you can't stone the woman without stoning the baby. Do you get it? You can't stone the woman without stoning the baby. See, she has to know that her church is going to treat her the way that Jesus treated that woman. He said, what? Neither I condemn you, but go and sin no more. In other words, come as you are, but don't stay as you came. Come as you are, but don't stay as you came. Now, lest there's some confusion in terms of if this is the church's issue, it's interesting. When I first started doing this work, God kind of downloaded into my head James 1:27. It talks about religion that God our Father finds is what? Pure and faultless. And anybody interested in religion that's pure and faultless to God our Father? That should be y'all and all y'all. That we care for the orphans and widows in their distress, right? And when this was written, what was an orphan? Well, it was a child without a father. What was a widow? It was typically a mother without a husband. Now, here's the difference. Back then, the husband and the father was dead. The difference today is that the husband and the father, proverbial here, husband and father are saying to the mother and the child, you're dead to me. So what Paul and her team have is cultural orphans and widows at the pregnancy center. That means that we, the people of the book, who care about religion that is pure and faultless in God's sight, have a very specific call to those folks. And here's the amazing thing, right? Because we are people of the book, there's an opportunity for a transforming resurrection for that proverbially dead father and husband, a Lazarus moment, that he can be brought back to life. That tomb, that stench in that tomb can be opened. Because see, we're people of the book. And we can tell him to rise up and to step into his responsibility. Any of y'all been to a wedding? Anybody? Want to claim their spouse? Now, if you've ever been to a wedding, right, and everybody's there, the groomsmen, the bride, the bridesmaids, the groomsmen, everybody, and sister's hitting the keyboard, she's just playing that music for the lady, and she's not coming down. And she's like, what the? Pastor's like, does anybody turn to the maid of honor and say, you need to step in so we can keep this thing moving? We don't do that, do we? You'd be all jacked up, marrying the wrong person. Right. What do? You go and check on the bride. She may have left her shoes in the car, may have ripped her dress. You check on the bride. See, because there ain't no wedding without the bride. See, the bride is the church. That would be who? Y'all and all y'all. The bride is not the pregnancy center, the pro-life movement. The Bible doesn't say the gates of hell won't prevail against that. The Bible says the gates of hell won't prevail against who? The church. That's y'all and all y'all. Therefore, if we're not having the success that we need to have around this issue, guess why? It's because the church is not in the role. This is why I always tell folks, this is why pastors are so important to this. See, her team, they're part of a parachurch ministry. I'm part of a parachurch ministry. Para means to come alongside. Just like if you're a lawyer, you have a paralegal. Well, who owns the client relationship, the lawyer or the paralegal? Lawyer. The paralegal has a very unique set of skills for a very specific time. Sound familiar? But the ultimate relationship for the client is the lawyers. See, the ultimate relationship for the clients in the pregnancy center is the church. So in other words, the people in the pregnancy center are members of your church that just don't know it yet. Do you see? And the reason why we're not having the success, I always tell pastors have to lead. I tell people in the pro-life movement, this is a John the Baptist moment for us. We must decrease. The church must increase. See, because pregnancy centers are like this boat here. Like it's a speedboat, like can get different places fast and has a certain number of buoys, short-term support, ministry, evangelism. But the small boat's supposed to be going to the big boat. See, the small boat can only hold so many folk. And after you have as many folk as you have, and you picked up and rescued them, and if there's no place to go, you look around the boat and say, who can swim? And you put them back in the water. See why we see them again as clients? See, what's supposed to be happening is the small boat's supposed to pull up next to the big boat, and the big boat's not just supposed to throw money and diapers. It's supposed to take people. See, because the things that folks are missing that's causing them to come back again and again and again are the things that people in the church have. We have these buoys, these life support, which means we're going to have to change what we do. We're going to have to stretch ourselves in a way that we've never stretched ourselves before. Are we ready to do that? Well, she wants to have an abortion because she doesn't have a place to live. Got an extra room? I'm just saying. Well, he didn't have a job. I know it's tough around here. Got a business? Take a chance on the guy? Well, he's running from fatherhood. Never had a father. Doesn't know what it looks like. You've been a father for 20 years, 30 years, made some mistakes maybe, willing to come alongside a young man. They've been living together for a while. They talk about marriage, but they've never seen what it looks like. You've been married for 40 years. Will you mentor a young couple? Talking about discipleship. Talking about making life disciples. This is a resource we developed at CareNet designed to equip churches to offer compassion, hope, help, and discipleship to anyone who's at risk for abortion. It puts a ministry in your church so that if you have small groups, and you're part of small groups, right? Small groups are what? Most of the time about us loving us. Somebody new try to come to your small group, you're like, It's our small group. It's our thing. You better go start your own. You're going to mess up our feng shui. We got a thing going on here. What if, instead of small groups being about us loving us, what if our small groups became about us loving them? What if our small groups were trained so that when Paula has a client, that she could call someone in your church, because you have a coordinator who's trained, and a group of people who've trained to kind of come alongside someone who's facing a pregnancy decision. And so that team of people, so that that client will never come back again. Not to be served, but to serve. That's what discipleship is. I mean, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the Great Commission. Right? What does it say? It says what? To make disciples. See, any good work that Christians do must equal discipleship. If compassion for someone who's pregnant, like water for the thirsty, food for the hungry, clothes for the naked, if that is a good work, everything that Christians do should equal discipleship. We do good work to what end? So that people might become disciples of Jesus Christ. No, by the way, that's in the last chapter of the first book of the New Testament. Let me just close up here. If you're not viewing the life issue through the lens of discipleship, I just want to encourage you that you're not viewing it the way that you should. If you're not seeing a woman facing a pregnancy decision, and the first thought in your mind is not, gosh, not like she needs to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. The child growing inside of her needs to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. The guy who got her pregnant needs to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. If you're not looking at it that way, I want to submit to you that you're not looking at it the right way. Not if you're going to link it to Christ's wise statement. See, part of this has to do with us modeling the ministry that Christ had. Jesus had two types of ministries. He had one ministry that I call a retrieving ministry and another ministry called a receiving ministry. And we saw the retrieving ministry first, that when we called his disciples. You with the net, you. Drop the net, I'm going to make you a fisher of men. You have the tree, yeah, come down, we're going to do a power lunch. But then he had this receiving ministry where he didn't call, he just received. Remember the woman with the issue of blood? Remember that? He didn't retrieve her, he just received her. And she just came, crawled, and just touched the hem of the garment. That's all she was going to do. And I think that's so significant because she had an issue of blood. See, abortion is an issue of blood. It's an issue of her blood, her flesh and blood. It's an issue of his flesh and blood. What am I going to do with my flesh and blood? Abortion's bloody. It's an issue of blood. But all you're going to do, if there's a woman facing a pregnancy decision, that's all she's going to do. She's just going to touch the hem of the garment in your church. You have so many ministries going on, so many things going on that you can't be like Jesus, so that even though the crowd was pressing on him, he still had the sensitivity to say, who touched me? So receiving and retrieving, those two ministries. Now the two ministries come together. When Peter's on the boat and the storm, and Jesus is walking on the water, and Peter's like, dude, I want to come out there. And Jesus is like, come on out, the water's fine. Peter gets out of the boat, starts to walk, starts to sink, takes his focus off Jesus, storms of life. What does Jesus do? See, initially he has what? His receiving ministry. Come on. Then when Peter starts to sink, what does he go? Swimming over. He shifts his ministry model to retrieving. He retrieves him, they walk back to the safety of the boat. See, when these young ladies and young men are at the pregnancy center, and they're working with Paula and her team, and they leave, and they're like, I'm going to have this baby. I'm going to do it. And she says, well, there's church people, and they're friendly, and we're out there. Yeah, we're friendly. Come on over. And she steps out of the safety of the pregnancy center, and then she gets back to the car, and the guy says, look, you can be with this or you can be with that, but you can't be with this and that. Or she gets home, and her mother said, well, you're not living here with that baby. What happens? She starts to sink. And see, we're not the only ones that are in the retrieving business. The abortion providers, they come along and say, hey, why don't you come over to my boat? See, if we're going to be followers of Christ, and we talk about that, that means we're going to have to change our ministry model. We're going to have to think about this the way that Christ did. His call was to what? Make disciples of all nations and teach them to obey all that I have taught you. That's what it means to be pro-abundant life. Amen? Thank you very much.